On the cold morning of Saturday, 30th of November 2019, just after 1:30 a.m., a quiet street in Bradford, West Yorkshire became the setting for a chain of events that would shock the nation. A man vanished without a trace, leaving behind unanswered questions, a devastated family, and a mystery that grew darker with every passing day. And years earlier, on the evening of Tuesday, 10th May 2011, in another part of Bradford, two friends stepped into a home, unaware that it would be the last time they were ever seen alive. By dawn, their bodies were discovered miles away, brutally beaten and left in a secluded lane. Two crimes, years apart, but each marked by betrayal, brutality, and a desperate search for justice. This is the story of Asghar Badshah and Mohammed Zubair's victims, and how relentless investigations by West Yorkshire police uncovered the truth behind these chilling murders. Welcome to UK Crime Documentaries. Let's get straight into the case. Before we move directly to the murder victim, it's important to step back and understand the background of the man responsible. In the underworld of Bradford's organised crime, one name stood out: Tahir Syed, a 42-year-old man who built a criminal empire as carefully as others might build a business. Syed wasn't just another street dealer, he was at the very top of a supply chain that moved staggering quantities of Class A drugs into the United Kingdom. Between 2016 and 2021, investigators estimate Syed and his associates smuggled in more than 5 tons of heroin and cocaine, with a wholesale value of around £125 million. What made his operation so difficult to detect was the level of sophistication. Each shipment, sometimes weighing up to 200 kilograms, was concealed within lorries carrying frozen chicken. The chicken wasn't intended for sale, it was nothing more than a cover, discarded once the drugs were safely stored. The drugs would be transported from the Netherlands and delivered to an industrial unit in Bradford, rented by Syed. Photos later recovered showed him personally operating a forklift truck, unloading consignments as if he were a warehouse manager running a legitimate business. From there, the packages were distributed further into the network, feeding an insatiable demand across the UK. What ultimately exposed Syed's empire was Operation Venetic, the National Crime Agency's nationwide response to cracking EncroChat. Investigators gained access to thousands of previously secret conversations. For Syed, this was catastrophic. Messages revealed not only his involvement, but his leadership, directing shipments, negotiating sales, and discussing staggering sums of money. The conversations painted a picture of a man who operated with confidence, arrogance even, believing his network was untouchable. The reality was different. While he lived a lifestyle marked by luxury cars, expensive watches, and overseas travel, Syed was already under NCA surveillance by 2019. His trusted lieutenants were already under close watch. We will talk about them in a few minutes. Piece by piece, investigators were mapping the true scale of his operation. By the summer of 2019, the once invisible empire was no longer a secret. Law enforcement had identified Syed as the kingpin of one of the UK's most significant organised crime groups, and it was only a matter of time before that empire began to crumble. On the 17th of September 2019, the carefully constructed empire of Tahir Syed began to crack. That day, investigators tracked 2 of his trusted men, Yusuf Kara and Imran Khan Ashraf, as they shifted unusually heavy bags between cars in Bradford. Officers decided it was time to act. Ashraf was stopped in Bolton. Hidden in his vehicle was a vacuum-packed bag containing nearly £130,000 in cash, along with 4 mobile phones. Later the same afternoon, Kara was arrested in Bradford. Inside his home, officers made a staggering discovery: 51 kilograms of heroin, tightly packed and ready for distribution. The real breakthrough, however, came from Kara's phone. Stored on it were photographs that would tie Syed directly to the operation, invoices for overseas consignments, images of large sums of money, and even pictures of Syed driving a forklift truck to unload drug shipments. This was no distant boss keeping his hands clean. This was a man immersed in the logistics of trafficking on an industrial scale. The arrests set off a chain reaction. Syed immediately realized the danger. In the days that followed, he moved quickly to liquidate assets. His luxury Mercedes GLE and Nissan GTR were traded for two high-end watches worth tens of thousands each. On the 19th of September 2019, just 2 days after Kara's arrest, Syed vanished from the country. It was a calculated retreat, but it also showed his fear. For years, he had appeared untouchable, confident that his empire was too well hidden to bring down. Syed's escape would buy him some time, but it would also set the stage for an even more shocking crime. One that revealed just how far he was willing to go when he believed his money, reputation, and authority were under threat. Two months after fleeing the UK, Syed was back. It was late November 2019 when he quietly returned to Bradford, not to rebuild his empire, but to deal with a crisis far closer to home. Around £600,000 in cash, drug money entrusted to the family, had gone missing. For Syed, this wasn't just a financial setback. It was about credibility. In his world, a missing fortune threatened his authority more than any police raid ever could. His suspicion fixed on one man, his own uncle, Asghar Badshah, a 39-year-old bus driver known for his warmth and generosity. Badshah was no career criminal. He worked regular shifts, earning a modest living. But he had been drawn into Syed's orbit when asked to safeguard money, unaware of the scale of the risk he was taking. When the cash disappeared, Syed became convinced that his uncle had either taken it or knew exactly where it had gone. Syed didn't move straight to violence. Instead, he turned to a different method, the lie detector test. In November, he arranged for Badshah to undergo polygraph examinations, first at a hotel in Bradford, then at another in Liverpool. The results came back unfavorably, feeding Syed's growing paranoia. To him, it was proof of betrayal. The lie detector sessions marked a turning point. They turned suspicion into certainty in Syed's mind and shifted his thinking from recovery to punishment. In the early hours of 30 November 2019, Asghar Badshah's life was violently torn away from him. At around 1:30 a.m., he was abducted from his mother's home on Mayo Road, Bradford, bundled into a Mercedes and driven out of the city. It was not strangers who came for him, but men acting under the orders of his own nephew, Tahir Syed. We will talk about them later in this video. The destination was a disused branch of Yorkshire Bank on Commercial Street in Batley. Closed since 2016, it looked deserted from the outside, but its basement vault was about to become the site of a brutal interrogation. For Syed, this was the place where he believed he would finally extract the truth about the missing £600,000. Once inside, the violence began. Over the course of more than 11 hours, Badshah was struck repeatedly with blunt objects. A later post-mortem revealed at least 48 separate injuries across his body, to his head, torso, arms and legs. The ferocity of the attack left no doubt about its intent. This was torture, designed to break him down and force a confession. Syed demanded to know where the money was. But no answers came. The beating went on through the night, each blow delivered with a cold determination to defend reputation at any cost. By morning, the interrogation had turned fatal. Badshah succumbed to catastrophic blunt force injuries, his body battered beyond recovery. Syed had not found the money, but what he left behind in that vault was only death, and the beginning of a desperate attempt to cover up what had been done inside those locked doors. The body was wrapped in cloth and placed on a shelving unit in the basement, hidden away from sight. To make discovery even less likely, a false wall was built to block off the staircase that led down to the vault. From the outside, the building appeared empty, its doors locked with sealed windows, but inside a man's remains were entombed, deliberately hidden in the dark. For the family, the days that followed were filled with fear and confusion. On the 4th of December 2019, 4 days after the abduction, Badshah was reported missing. His relatives pleaded for information, unable to understand why a man known for his kindness and regular routines had simply vanished. Syed added to the pain. He reassured the family that Badshah was safe, claiming he was comfortable and well. In reality, he knew his uncle had already been dead for days. His lies were part of a wider strategy to buy time, to maintain an illusion, while police inquiries edged closer to the truth. Detectives with West Yorkshire Police's Homicide and Major Inquiry Team launched an intensive search. Inquiries spread across Bradford, Batley and beyond, as officers pieced together the last known movements of the missing man. The case was treated as a kidnap, but concern was growing that it would end as something far worse. On 29th of December 2019, nearly a month after Badshah's disappearance, officers forced entry into the abandoned Yorkshire Bank in Batley. In the basement vault, they found what the family had dreaded but suspected: his body, battered, wrapped, and concealed. As detectives built their case, it became clear that Tahir Syed had not acted alone. The abduction and concealment of Asghar Badshah involved others, each playing a role in carrying out or supporting the plan. One of the central figures was Chaisar Shah, a 40-year-old from Bradford. Phone records and surveillance placed him in direct contact with Syed during the days surrounding the abduction. Detectives concluded that Shah was one of the men physically involved in taking Badshah from his home in the early hours of the 30th of November. He was later charged not only with kidnap, but also with manslaughter, reflecting the part he played in the events that led to Badshah's death. Alongside him, 2 others were drawn into the conspiracy: Liam Buckley from Berkshire and Sabah Shahmaradi from Surrey. Both were outsiders geographically, yet communications data showed their links to the Bradford group. Messages exchanged before and after the abduction suggested knowledge of the plan to seize Badshah and awareness of Syed's determination to recover the missing cash. Their involvement was not in the violence itself, but in the agreement to make the kidnapping possible. Detectives moved against them once the EncroChat material and phone analysis tied them into the conspiracy. Another figure, Wajid Hussain, was also traced through call records and financial evidence. Though his role was smaller, investigators found enough to show he had been part of the conspiracy to kidnap. His presence in communications around the time of the abduction placed him within the circle of trust Syed had relied upon. Finally, attention turned to Syed's wife, Sobiya Syed. Detectives following the money uncovered her role in handling criminal property linked to the operation. While she had not taken part in the abduction, she was implicated in attempts to manage the proceeds and protect the family's financial interests in the aftermath. By mid-2020, West Yorkshire Police had gathered enough to charge each of them. Arrests were made in Bradford, Berkshire and Surrey, bringing the wider conspiracy into the open. Two days after the murder, Tahir Syed was gone. On the 2nd of December 2019, he slipped out of the UK once more, this time determined not to return. His route through Europe was fragmented, designed to make tracing difficult. Records later showed him travelling through the Netherlands, Albania and Kosovo before eventually settling in Turkey. He used a false North Macedonian passport, a forged identity that allowed him to cross borders and rent accommodation without raising alarms. Despite being on the run, Syed refused to let go of the business that had made him powerful. Even abroad, he continued to direct shipments. In July 2020, Dutch authorities intercepted one of those consignments, a lorry containing 155 kilograms of cocaine, hidden among legitimate goods. The seizure demonstrated that even while Syed was wanted for murder, he was still orchestrating large-scale importations. Back in the UK, detectives from West Yorkshire Police and the National Crime Agency worked with international partners to track his movements. The scale of the search turned it into a global manhunt. Syed might have thought that his false identity and constant movement gave him an advantage, but his network left traces: communications, financial transfers, the fingerprints of organized crime that investigators across Europe were trained to follow. On the 11th of November 2021, Turkish authorities finally closed in. Syed was detained in Turkey and placed into custody, but his fight to avoid justice was far from over. What followed was a 2-year battle against extradition, with Syed resisting every legal move to return him to the UK. Only in April 2024, after years of persistence from British prosecutors and cooperation from Turkish officials, was Syed finally extradited back to the UK. By the summer of 2025, the long investigation reached its final act inside Leeds Crown Court. After a 5-week trial, the jury returned unanimous verdicts. Tahir Syed was guilty of murder, conspiracy to kidnap, and major drug importation conspiracies. He had already admitted conspiracy to possess criminal property. On the 13th of June 2025, he stood before the judge to hear his fate. He was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 34 years and 154 days, taking into account the time he had already spent in custody following his extradition. The wider conspiracy did not end with Syed. His associates were also brought to justice. Kaysar Shah, 40, admitted manslaughter, conspiracy to kidnap, and handling criminal property. He was sentenced to 18 years. Liam Buckley, 38, and Sabah Shahmuradi, 39, admitted conspiracy to kidnap. Each received 7 years and 2 months. Wajid Hussain, 43, also admitted conspiracy to kidnap. He was jailed for 4 years and 2 months. Subayya Syed, 41, pleaded guilty to conspiracy to possess criminal property. She was given 2 years, suspended for 2. In the spring of 2011, tensions inside a quiet Bradford household began to boil beneath the surface. Mohammed Zubair, a local taxi driver, lived at Heath Terrace in Barker End with his wife, Kainat Bibi, and his mother, Arab Sultana. Outwardly, it was an ordinary family home, but Zubair had discovered a truth he could not ignore. His wife was conducting an affair with Ahmadin Syed Kiel, a 35-year-old Afghan electrician from London who was married with 7 children. On the evening of 10th May 2011, that discovery collided with reality. Kyle travelled to Bradford with his friend, Imran Khan, a 27-year-old labourer from the city. The 2 men arrived at Zubair's house expecting little more than a conversation. Out of respect, they removed their shoes before stepping into the living room. Neither man could have imagined what awaited them inside. The moment they crossed the threshold, the atmosphere shifted. Zubair was waiting, not with words, but with weapons. He armed himself with a hammer or possibly a dumbbell bar, an object capable of delivering lethal force. What followed was described later in court as a ferocious and brutal assault. Kyle was struck at least 6 times to the head. Some blows came even after he had already been knocked unconscious, the force so severe it drove fragments of bone into his brain. His friend Khan fared no better. He suffered at least 13 strikes, desperately trying to fend off the attack as it rained down. The sheer violence left both men fatally injured on the living room sofa where they had sat only minutes earlier. Once the attack was over, Zubair set about hiding the evidence. He attempted to wipe away the blood that had spattered across the ceiling, walls and furniture, but no amount of cleaning could erase the scale of the violence. He then turned to disposal. With chilling practicality, he loaded both bodies into his Volkswagen Transporter taxi. That night, he drove out to New Lane near the village of Tong, a secluded stretch of road just outside Bradford. In the darkness, he dumped the bodies by the roadside before vanishing back into the city. It was a temporary concealment at best. In the early hours of 11 May, passing motorists made a grim discovery. The bodies of Ahmadin Syed Kiel and Imran Khan, battered, lifeless and discarded in the shadows of the countryside. The killings were savage in their execution, personal in their motive, and calculated in their aftermath. What began with a secret affair had erupted into double murder, an act that would soon pull in not only Zubair, but members of his own family. In the aftermath of the double murder, Mohammed Zubair wasted no time in securing his escape. Within hours of abandoning the bodies, he turned to the two people closest to him for help: his mother, Arab Sultana, and his wife, Kidnap Bibi. On the 11th of May 2011, the day after the killings, Sultana booked and paid for her son's ticket out of the country. The destination was Pakistan. By that evening, Zubair had boarded a flight, vanishing beyond the reach of British police. It was a calculated move, one that revealed not only his determination to evade justice, but also the willingness of his family to support him in doing so. But even as he fled, police were already closing in. The scene was immediately sealed off by West Yorkshire Police. Forensic teams combed through the stretch of road, collecting tire marks, blood traces, and soil samples. Tire marks, blood traces, and the positioning of the bodies all told investigators they had been transported and dumped deliberately. Detectives worked backwards. Phone records and witness statements placed both victims at Heath Terrace in Barker End on the evening of the 10th of May. That house belonged to Mohammed Zubair. When police spoke with his family, alarm bells rang. Kidnap Bibi told detectives her husband was on pilgrimage in Morocco, but airline records showed that Arab Sultana had purchased a ticket to Pakistan for her son the very next day. The contradiction marked the first clear sign of a cover-up. A search warrant for Heath Terrace confirmed those suspicions. The living room bore signs of a hurried cleanup. Blood had been wiped from the walls, ceiling, and furniture, but forensic testing revealed extensive traces invisible to the eye. DNA confirmed the blood belonged to both victims. The spatter pattern showed that the attack had happened right there in the living room, the sofa still bearing marks of violence. Attention turned to Zubair's Volkswagen transporter cab. The vehicle had also been wiped down, but swabs taken from hidden areas revealed more DNA traces of the victims. It was the link between the attack inside the house and the disposal in Tong. With the forensic picture now clear, detectives widened the investigation. Zubair was out of reach in Pakistan, but those who had helped him remained in Bradford. His mother, Arab Sultana, was charged with assisting an offender. In 2013, she was jailed for 3 years and 9 months for her role in ensuring his escape. His wife, Kidnap Bibi, was convicted of perverting the course of justice, her lies to police costing her 20 months in prison. Others connected to the crime also faced trial. In 2012, Sabir Hussain, a fellow minicab driver and close associate of Zubair, was accused of taking part in the attack at Heath Terrace. Prosecutors argued that while he may not have struck the fatal blows, his presence and actions had directly contributed to the deaths of 2 men. The jury acquitted him of murder, but convicted him of manslaughter, recognizing his role in the events that night. He was sentenced to 10 years in prison. For the families of Ahmadin Syed Kiel and Imran Khan, these convictions brought some relief, but they did not deliver full justice. The man who had wielded the weapon was still thousands of miles away, shielded by distance and determined to resist every effort to bring him back. For West Yorkshire Police, the case was far from closed. What lay ahead was a pursuit across borders, a battle for extradition that would test the limits of international cooperation. For more than 2 years after the murders, Mohammed Zubair remained a fugitive. That changed in November 2013. Acting on intelligence shared through international channels, Pakistani authorities arrested Zubair. It was a breakthrough for West Yorkshire Police, who had never given up the pursuit. Yet the arrest was only the beginning of a long and arduous process. Zubair refused to return willingly. He launched a series of legal challenges in Pakistan, determined to resist extradition. His appeals wound their way through the courts, at one stage reaching the country's Supreme Court. British prosecutors and detectives worked closely with counterparts in Islamabad, navigating the absence of a formal extradition treaty between the UK and Pakistan. The case became more than just the pursuit of one man. It was a test of international cooperation. For the first time in over a decade, Pakistan agreed to return a suspect to the UK. In May 2016, after years of legal wrangling, Mohammed Zubair was finally extradited. 6 years after the murders, Mohammed Zubair finally stood before a jury. His trial opened at Bradford Crown Court in 2017. The prosecution presented the case in stark terms. This was no spontaneous outburst, they argued, but a calculated, cold-blooded double murder. In the dock, Zubair attempted to shift blame. He claimed that his associate, Sabir Hussain, had been solely responsible for the killings. But the jury rejected this version of events in the light of forensic evidence from the living room, and the taxi linked directly back to Zubair. After weeks of testimony and deliberation, the verdict was returned. Mohammed Zubair was found guilty of both murders. When he returned to court for sentencing, the judge described the crimes as deliberate and merciless. It was one of the heaviest sentences handed down at the time in Bradford Crown Court. The sentence was life imprisonment, with a minimum term of 32 years before parole could even be considered. What do you think about the cases and the sentences? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear your take. And if you found this breakdown informative, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next episode of UK crime documentaries.